«10 settembre 1976. Cari mamma e papà, sono omosessuale e lo sono sempre stato. So che è un duro colpo per voi e vi farà stare molto male. È estremamente importante che capiate che sono una persona molto felice e non ho rimpianti su quello che sono. Non provo vergogna e non mi lascerò più spaventare da paure inventate dagli altri. Entrambi mi avete cresciuto con un insieme straordinario di buoni valori e principi. Mi avete insegnato a essere onesto, ad amare gli altri, ad aiutare quelli che non ce la fanno da soli, ad essere forte e a combattere. Non scapperò dalla lotta che vedo davanti a me. In qualche modo troverò il coraggio di farmi valere e riuscirò a farcela contro ogni speranza. Per fare questo, però, devo continuare ad avere il vostro amore. Venire respinto da uno di voi sarebbe insopportabile per me. Con affetto, David.
Caro David, ho fatto questo sogno. Sembrava come se fossimo ai piedi di un'alta collina e i fiori stavano sbocciando tantissimi e uccelli di ogni tipo cantavano. Tu te ne andavi in giro così felice, con quell'aria così intelligente, tutto preso nei tuoi pensieri. Il sole splendeva. Alla fine siamo arrivati a una specie di zona d'ombra. Io non volevo che tu andassi avanti, ma tu sei andato lo stesso. Diventava sempre più buio, niente fiori, niente uccelli, solo oscurità e basta. E all'improvviso un avvoltoio, uno grande, era lì appollaiato su un albero spoglio, e poi uno più piccolo, e poi altri, e altri ancora. Tu hai fatto come per tornare, ma quando venivi per ritornare nel mondo vivo, intorno alla collina c'era una recinzione e a ogni palo c'era una piccola porta e i tuoi amici ci stavano davanti. E quando provavi a entrare, loro ti davano le spalle e chiudevano a chiave la porta. Gli uccelli e i fiori erano morti e niente più canto. Non potevi scappare dalla zona oscura. Era come se io ti guardassi da sottoterra e tu piangevi e singhiozzavi per il dolore. Ti avviavi di nuovo verso la tua penombra e allora gli avvoltoi venivano per te. Con affetto, mamma.
And here I was, afraid that you wouldn't recognize me without my cowboy hat. That was a tough letter to get from my mother. After I received it, I was not allowed home for 5 years. And my father disowned me for the rest of his life. It was very tough. It was painful. But unfortunately, I was not the only one. The times back then were very difficult. Over 4,000 parents had placed their children in mental institutions to have lobotomies done, to make their sons and daughters vegetables because they were so filled with shame. I remember my best friend in high school was Freddie Davis, who was also gay. And at 16, he took a gun and killed himself. And that night, over dinner, when I was grieving, my father announced at the table to the family that how fortunate his family was that he killed himself because he saved them all that shame. Well, I certainly got the message. I wasn't about to say anything. Then when I went to college, another close friend of mine, I went to school in Arizona, decided to go to Tucson, Arizona for a weekend, and he went to a gay bar. This was in the 1960s. And when he came out, 4 young high school students had baseball bats, and they beat him to death. We looked for justice. We wanted justice. But what happened is, the judge looked down from the bench, and he looked at the 4 young men who had taken the baseball bats, and he said, "Thank you for performing a service for our community," and gave them 6 months probation. And they walked out of the courtroom as we sat there laughing. It was a difficult time. Even if we had dinner parties, the police would raid it. And they'd barge into our homes, take us out from the dinner table, put us up against the wall as helicopters flew overhead, and arrested us because we dared to get together for a social evening. I went to California. Most gay people go to California or New York. It's sort of mandatory. And I found a group of 30 young men, my age, in the 20s and 30s, doctors, lawyers, carpenters, workers in the factories. And each week we would meet to give each other the courage to be gay. We wanted to come out. We wanted to be free at last. And we'd met just in time because there was a great deal of unrest going on about gay people in 1976, 1977, and we decided that we had to form the first political committee ever formed in the world by the LGBT community. And we insisted that 50% of the board of directors be women for the first time and 50% be men. And the co-chairs will be a man and a woman. And that had never happened in our community. Well, we did it just in time because there was an orange juice queen. Not a nice lady. I don't even know how she won. Nita Bryant. And she decided, I guess because she couldn't get attention any other way, that she would put on a ballot in Miami that would take all of our rights away. The right to a job, the right to public accommodations, all of them away. Now, quite honestly, we didn't take it seriously. We could not believe our fellow Americans, our families, our brothers, our sisters would actually vote to make it impossible for us to work. And it passed 2-1. Then she took it to St. Paul, it passed 2-1. She took it to Wichita, and it passed 3-1. She took it to Eugene, and it passed 4-1. So then they decided to broaden the base. So they brought it to California, where I was living, and her and a state senator named Briggs put on the ballot for the California voters to vote on an initiative that would make it against the law for school teachers who were gay to teach children. And if a teacher was accused, just accused, of being an LGBT person, they had to be put on trial publicly in the town chambers. And they had to prove that they weren't gay. Now, for me, that would have been a lost cause. We got the first polling information, and it showed it passing by 75 to 80%. A good number of the people in the community who were gay and lesbian said, let's not fight it. We can't win. For us to put any more money in this, it's just wasted money. To fight it just means we're going to be losers again. We are done. On the other hand, there were a few of us that said, I don't care if we get 10%. If I'm going down fighting for my freedom. I'm going down fighting for freedom. Well, we didn't have any money because nobody wanted to put any more money into it. So, there was a pastor named Reverend Troy Perry, whose churches were created around the world to minister to all of those LGBT people who have been kicked out of the church, kicked out of their community churches, and had no place to worship. In the year 1977, he had over a dozen of his churches firebombed and burned to the ground. He was frantically himself looking money to rebuild them because as fast as he could build churches, people would come in the middle of the night, throw a firebomb, and burn them down. He says, I'll get you the money. I said, Troy, you've got to raise money for your churches to rebuild. He said, why rebuild a church if we're not free? So he went down in front of the federal building and started a fast for 17 days. He did not take a bite. And he has said he won't take a bite unless he gets $100,000, not pledged, but in the bank so that we could fight for our freedom. We sat there with him and we sang songs and we held hands. And on the 17th day, we deposited the last check to reach $100,000. And we had an agape meal of bread and wine and gave thanks. But we were in business. Nita Bryant, watch out. So the first thing we had to do was find a headquarters where we would run the statewide campaign. They wanted me to run the campaign to oppose it. Quite honestly, nobody else wanted to do it because no one expected that we could win. The headquarters was pretty sad. It had lights hanging by the wire from the ceiling, paint peeling off the walls, linoleum floors, and they were buckling. But it was cheap. It was cheap, and it was our first campaign headquarters. Now, there was a lesbian named Gail Wilson. Gail thought she was the best-dressed lesbian in the world. And she might have been. She was very wealthy, and she drove a Rolls-Royce convertible, and she chain smoked. And because she chain smoked, she had a really deep voice. So I called Gail, and I said, listen, there's an elected official who will give us all the office furniture we need. And I know you know a lot of designer friends. Can you get a truck and go pick it up? Sure, honey, sure. Half an hour later, her and her designers came back. I said, you're back so soon? Where's the furniture? It was ugly. No self-respecting gay person would come into that headquarters with their furniture. I said, Gail, what am I supposed to sit on? She said, well, we talked. We need to be upset. So it's Friday. You go away until Monday and just trust Mother Gail. I said, all right, Gail, I'm going to trust you. I came in on Monday. I have not to this day had a better headquarters in my life. Recessed lighting, two-tone walls, wall-to-wall carpeting, plants, designer desk, a reception area. She had mobilized every interior designer in Los Angeles, and they came in and volunteered their time to give a headquarters that we could be proud to fight for, where we would have dignity and not feel that we were immediately walking into a loser space. Gail knew what she was doing. Well, it was tough. You see, under California law, if you give more than $99, you got to go on a list. And so nobody wanted to be on that list because they can go up and they thought, well, they think I'm gay and I'll lose my job. Well, I've never seen so many $99 checks in my life. I didn't know it was possible to write that many. And so Sally Fisk, who was our press secretary, she said, let's just do a little story about how people are afraid to give. And I said, okay. So she called the Los Angeles Times, and they came out, and we was talking about how people are afraid to give because they don't want to be thought of as gay. We were hoping for a small story inside the paper that might get a contribution or two. I woke up the next day, across the whole newspaper on the front page, "Fear Stalks No on 6 campaign." I walked into the headquarters. The phones were ringing off the hook. Lily Tomlin, $10,000. Gregory Peck, $10,000. Paul Newman, $25,000. John Travolta, only $5,000, and it should have been more. But every star in Hollywood was calling in to make pledges and say, "I'm gay too, I'm standing with you." Well, then it was safe for anyone to give because no one knew who was gay and who wasn't. And money started pouring in. Money started pouring in. When we started, only 25% of the people in California was on our side. And we got it up to 45%. But I couldn't break it. We just stood there week after week, and I just said, oh, we're so close. I can't stand the idea that we lost. And I knew it was going to take something close to a miracle. So I knew 2 closeted members of Governor Ronald Reagan's staff. Now, I know that must shock you that he had closeted gay people working for you. So I called them and I said, listen, it's Dave. I need 15 minutes with the governor. And they said, why? And I said, because I want to convince him to come out against this initiative. And they said, David, there's not a chance in hell that he's going to be on your side. And I said, I have to try. It's our only hope of winning. So they went back and forth, and finally they said, well, we need to meet with you in person to talk about this. Except they didn't want to be seen with me in public because I was known to be gay. So they picked a place called Denny's Diner that was in the poorest section of Los Angeles, and they knew no Republican would ever see him there. They didn't want to call attention to themselves, so they showed up, I kid you not, in a trench coat in the middle of summer, the collar up, hat and sunglasses, coming in. I said, if you didn't want to draw attention to yourself, you just did. They said, we're going to give you 15 minutes, but we want you to know we've checked. The governor's going to come out against this initiative. And we also want you to know that if you meet with him, we're going to use the fact that he listened to both sides, and it's going to even hurt you more. And I said, well, I'll take that heat. It will be my fault. We walked in, Peter Scott, the man I most loved in my life, and I went together. We even got new suits. We sat down. The governor couldn't have been more generous, kind. He actually touched us, and back then people wouldn't touch us. said, what can I do for your boys? Now, he had a jar of jelly bean candies that he liked to get. I was so nervous, I was taking jelly beans and stuffing them into my mouth. Finally, Peter slapped my hand and said, no more jelly beans. I said, Governor, we are here to get you to come out on the side of freedom. And he said, well, that's one way to put it, but you know I'm going to be on the other side. I know my staff told you. And I said, Governor, I'm shocked. And he said, David, you really can't be shocked. And I said, oh, I am. I said, I never thought that a conservative governor like Ronald Reagan would be on the side of the anarchists. He said, anarchists? And I said, yes, Governor. I said, they badly wrote this measure, this law. And look right here. What it says is, any teacher accused of being gay, didn't say if they were gay, they would have to go in a public trial before the community. So I said, I don't know about you, Governor, but I was a hellraiser in school. So if I was going to get a failing grade or be kicked out of school, I'd just say that teacher's gay. And I said, the kids are going to run the schools. It's going to be anarchy, Governor. Teachers are going to live in fear. He said, thank you. We talked for 45 minutes, and he called the people who drafted the law idiots, I think it was, or maybe not something as clean as that. So as we were leaving, he put his hand on my shoulder and said, thank you, David. I said, can I ask what you're going to do? He said, no. And I said, so we went back to the headquarters, and the whole staff, we were on pins and needles. 2 days later, in every newspaper in the state of California was a guest editorial from Governor Ronald Reagan, who came out against this initiative because it would lead to anarchy in the schools. We went from 45% to 55% in 25 hours. And come election day, for the first time, we lined up to vote as a community with hope. At last, the tribe had a chance to go into the ballot box with hope and dignity. And when we won that night, we thought that the world will never again be the same. We were suddenly accepted into culture. We were invited into people's homes. There was the sexual revolution, the excitement of a people becoming free. And then came AIDS.
My brother lived in San Francisco. He said he finally found his place. And when I go to San Francisco, everywhere I look, I see his face. But then I faced childhood on the stark Montana sky, and but he seemed to always have cities in his eyes. He longed for possibility. He lived to move away, and he finally found his dream in the city by the bay. friends in a small-time college town, and Joe had personality. What a campus clown. His jokes hit deeper rivers that bubbled far below, and he rode a current west where the rapid waters flow. Lots of us had brothers there who would love to show the sights and share the balmy freedom of San Francisco nights. They like it so much more than anywhere they'd been, and we thought he would be there when he'd made it back again. My brother lived in San Francisco. He said he finally found his place. And when I go to San Francisco, everywhere I look, I see his face.
How do you talk about something that you want to forget? How do I share with you and find the words of something that was so horrible that you can't imagine that it actually happened in your life? Peter and I one day got a call and said our good friend Ken Schnorr was going into the hospital. It was Friday, we rushed over, and he was dead by Monday. By Wednesday, Tom Van Streen was in the hospital, and he was dead by Friday. Bill Carey was in the hospital, and he was dead within a couple of days. Every week we were going to funerals. No one would tell us what was happening to us. Never have I felt more alone. As the epidemic grew, the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, I guess with the best intentions, labeled it gay cancer. And by making it a gay disease, truly, no one cared if we died. Suddenly, if you showed signs of the illness or they thought you were a gay couple, we weren't allowed in restaurants. Doctors had permission not to treat us. Nurses were given permission not to treat us. The Home Care Workers Union voted not to send any of their people into houses with AIDS. Dentists wouldn't treat us. And perhaps most difficult, undertakers would not bury us. It was horrendous. Under any other conditions, a community would normally lay mortally wounded in the midst of such death and devastation. But not the LGBT community. Not us. We were made of stronger stuff. We learned to take care of each other. We built our own healthcare institutions. Most hospitals wouldn't admit us because they said we would scare other patients away and we would cost them money. So we found a hospital in New York named St. Vincent's. We found a hospital in San Francisco named San Francisco General. And we found one in Los Angeles called Sherman Oaks. And they became AIDS wards. Sometimes I would know 3 or 4 people at a time in there. And it became so if you got AIDS, you didn't say, David has AIDS. You'd say, David just was taken to Sherman Oaks. And we all knew what that meant. So we mobilized. We created AIDS organizations in every city. And in our charter in LA, since a lot of families would not come to see their dying sons because they were gay and had AIDS, I still to this day do not know how a father and mother could not come see their dying son. But we wrote in our charter of the organization we created that no gay person shall die alone of AIDS. And not one did. I had a chart on my living room wall, and I had to work during the day, and I had lunch breaks early in the morning, evening. And every day I had a different assignment. So-and-so needed someone to read to them. So-and-so needed their pets taken care of. Laundry, food delivered. We learned how to change tubes and give IVs. I learned how to put lotions on shingles and Mycobacterium avian and pneumocystis and all these things that were happening to us. And no one cared. So now we had to raise money once again for this organization we had created to make sure that our people were taken care of. And the people who helped us before, the progressives, wouldn't touch us. So finally, Peter and I got invited to a West Side home of the entertainment industry to have a cocktail party and then a very formal dinner party for 24 people where we could talk about AIDS. This was a big deal. We needed the money desperately. Our friends were dying every week. We go, the cocktail party's fine. We go into a big dining room and there's this beautiful, majestic table set for 24, candelabras, flowers, china, crystal. And we walk around the table looking for our place setting. And when we get to our place, at our name tag are paper plates, plastic forks, and plastic cups, where everyone else had china and crystal. It was the most humiliating moment of my life. What would you do? Peter and I whispered back and forth, and we said, we should storm out of here and make a point. And then we talked, and we calmed down, and we whispered to each other, and we said, our brothers are dying, and we need the money. So we sat through that meal, eating off those paper plates. And when it came time to speak, I rose from my chair and lifted the paper plate with me and said, this is why we need your money. I left that evening with $250,000 to take back to fight to save the lives of our friends. But it wasn't the only attack. Our government wasn't doing anything. Our president never even mentioned the word AIDS for 6 years. Many of you have seen Dallas Buyers Club or might have heard of it, where the guy in Dallas got drugs for HIV and AIDS out of Mexico. All of us did that. I took my turn once a month going down to Tijuana, stuffing myself and hiding things in the cars with AL7201, ribavirin, and all sorts of promising AIDS therapies, hoping I wouldn't get caught at the border. It was just what we did what we had to do. Now, Congress wasn't helping at all. Week after week, the right-wing senators would submit legislation to punish us for having AIDS, as if we didn't have enough going on. The one I will never forget is that there was a piece of legislation that would require every gay male in America to get a tattoo on his hand. It came within 2 votes of passing. Now, we spent a lot of time deciding what kind of tattoo we wanted. And we wanted to make sure it was color coordinated. Our humor got us through a lot. Then we went to Washington, D.C., and we stormed all sorts of places and sat in the streets. But in 1986, we went to Washington, D.C., all the leaders of all the organizations and some people of faith, and we decided to sit and block the traffic in front of the White House because he had not even mentioned the word AIDS. So we're sitting there in the street in the White House, I kid you not, get up here. And these trucks come up. And the police get out, and they have helmets with shields, and they have removed their name tags so we wouldn't know who they were. And they had yellow gloves clear up to here because they didn't want to touch us. Well, we sat in that street, and we were defeated. And thousands had come to see us get arrested. It was a big deal. And to this day, I always will be indebted to this queen who in the crowd started chanting, "Your gloves don't match your shoes. Your gloves don't match your shoes." And suddenly hundreds of people were chanting at the police, "Your gloves don't match your shoes." And they didn't. And we took our power back. We weren't defeated anymore. Shortly thereafter that, there was another initiative in California that would set up concentration camps for people with AIDS. This time it was a little easier because the Jewish community took the lead in fighting that initiative along with the Japanese community, both who had suffered internment. And we won overwhelmingly. This is difficult. Peter was getting sicker. And he would go in and out of a coma. I so loved him. 12 years together. And it came to Election Day in 1988, and a group of us had gone to the candidate for the Democrats and offered to give him $1 million to get a better shot at getting help for our community, and they turned us down because they couldn't accept the gay money. And I had we had a bedroom set up in the living room for Peter, and I would come down each morning and tubes, bathe him, whatever. And I came down this morning, he was mostly in a coma. And he woke up, and he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Peter, welcome back. How are you?" He said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to go vote today. Today's the presidential election in 1988. And he said, "Well, I'm voting too." I said, "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. You've been so sick, I didn't think you'd be able to vote. I didn't get you an absentee ballot that you could fill out and vote ahead of time." He said, "If it's the last thing I do, I'm going to go vote against the people who did this to me and vote for freedom for myself." I said, okay. So I called a friend, and we reached down in the bed and scooped him up and lifted him in our arms and carried it. We had to put him in the back of a truck because he couldn't sit up. And we took him to the polls. And we started lifting him up, and he said, no, I'm walking to that ballot booth by myself. And he couldn't have weighed more than 100 pounds, and he used to weigh 180. He went up that driveway, and he went in the voting booth, and he voted for freedom. He came out and collapsed to the ground. We rushed and picked him up and took him back. 3 months later, there was another underground I should tell you about. AIDS is a horrible death. You waste away, you starve to death. You become skin and bones. And a lot of the people who had AIDS wanted to die with dignity and not as a victim. We did our best working with the doctors to honor those requests, and I took part in that. Except Peter's doctor called me and said, it's Peter's turn. He left the bag of morphine in our refrigerator. All of the friends left so they would not have any legal problems. I went up, hooked up the bag of morphine, crawled in bed and held him in my arms. Then the others started arriving, and the bed was surrounded, and Peter loved me to rub his feet every day. He had ugly feet, but he loved me to rub his feet. And I knew what I had to do. And I let him go, and I went down to the end of the bed, and I lifted his feet into my hands and slowly rubbed his feet until I felt the life leave him.
Just as I am, without one plea, but that thy blood was shed for me, and that thou bidst me come to thee, O Lamb of God, I come. I come. Just as I am, and waiting not to rid my soul of one dark blot, to thee whose blood can cleanse each spot, oh Lamb of God, I come, I come. Just as I am, though tossed about with many a conflict, many a doubt, fightings within and fears without, oh Lamb of God, I come, I come. just as I am, thou wilt receive, wilt welcome, pardon, cleanse, relieve, because thy promise I believe. O Lamb of God, I come, because thy promise I believe. O Lamb of God, I come, I come.
Unfortunately, we didn't get a chance to grieve too much. At the day of Peter's funeral, my best friend, David Quarles, became sick, and that night I was back in Sherman Oaks taking care of him on the day of Peter's funeral. Do you remember that support group I told you about of 30 of us that got together to sort of get the strength to come out? I am the only one still alive. I gave the eulogies at their funerals, 29 of them before they were 40. I lost 300 friends. In 1989, 1990, I gave 90 eulogies in 2 years. But we never gave up the fight. And then my friend Bill Clinton, we had been roommates in college and we had known each other for 12 years. We sort of bonded because we both came from very poor backgrounds. He called me and he said, David. And I said, yes, Mr. Clinton. And he said, I'm going to run for president. And I said, so am I. He was serious. And he said, I want you to be in the kitchen cabinet, the 12 people surrounding me that advises me on my campaign. Now, that no gay person, lesbian person, transgender, bisexual had ever been asked to occupy a position like that. But I had to say, I don't know. And he said, what do you mean you don't know? I always thought we would do this together. I said, I don't know where you stand on AIDS. I don't know where you stand on gay rights. And I'm not going back in the closet for anybody, friend or foe. We have bared such a burden that is the priority in our life. He said, well, what do you want? I said, the right to serve our country in the military with dignity and honor and openness, a civil rights law that would allow us to eat in public accommodations and not be fired from our job, and money and drugs to fight the horrible epidemic of AIDS. He said, well, I can do that. He said, can you write up a briefing paper? And I said, yeah, sure. So I wrote up a briefing paper, and he came to visit that political committee I told you about, and him and Mrs. Clinton spent 4 hours and impressed the hell out of us. And we decided to endorse him. And we worked night and day for him. We did everything we could to get him elected. So we're coming up on May and the convention's in July in New York. And I said, Governor Clinton, you have not talked to my community yet. You have not given a speech on gay rights, and you have not given a speech on AIDS. He said, well, okay. But it was like pulling teeth to get it scheduled. But finally it was scheduled on May 13th. And we had 1,500 people packed into a ballroom in Hollywood. All of them had paid $1,000 to be there. I had written him a speech called I Have a Vision and You Are a Part of It. It's become a very historic speech. And I went to pick him up at the airport, and he comes in and he gets off the plane and he gets in the car as we get ready to go in the motorcade to the Hollywood Palace. And he said, "Well, David, I just left the plane where nobody wants to give me this speech." And I said, "That's funny, Governor. I just left the hall where no one believes you're going to give it." He gave it, and it was splendid. Interesting, where they all thought it was going to hurt him, his campaign had tried to ban the press from coming in. And we threatened that if they banned the press from going in, we would just walk out. Well, ironically, it helped him. The next day, the newspapers were full of praise for this young candidate of courage. The Washington Post called it a defining moment of his campaign. The first time he's become presidential, the New York Times said. "See, you hang around with us and you're a winner." We get to the convention, and every morning, because I'm in the kitchen cabinet, I go to his suite in the hotel, and we go over the strategy. Well, it was like the most incredible convention. It's the first time in history that LGBT people were allowed to participate in a major way. We had someone speak from AIDS in prime time. Roberta Nachtenberg, a lesbian from San Francisco, spoke in prime time. We had over 300-400 delegates to that convention that we had organized to get elected. And there was a young Texan. I hope you noticed I did have my cowboy boots on tonight. And just in case you weren't paying attention, I want to point them out because they cost a lot of money. So, the floor manager for the gay delegates was a Texan named Tom Henderson, who has since died of AIDS. One of the brightest political geniuses I've ever met in my life, and tough cookie. And he also had cowboy boots and a hat, so we sort of became friends. And I said, "Tom, we got a problem." He said, "What's that?" You had walkie-talkies on the floor. You've all seen pictures of it. I said, "I just got a copy of the president's acceptance speech. And he says in the speech, I am there for African Americans, Asian Americans, Filipino Americans, Irish Americans, cats, dogs, you name it, but we're not mentioned." After all this work, all this money we raised, $4 million, we're not mentioned. And I said to the Clinton people, I said, "That's either got to come out or we've got to be added." And they said, "Oh, it's too late. It's not going to happen. Don't cause trouble. You don't want the reputation of a troublemaker." And I said, "Too late." Too late. So I got Tom and I got together underneath the California standard. And I said, "Tom, I need a head count. And I need it quick. Here's what the situation is." And I explained it to him. I said, "If that's not in the speech, I want you to tell me with a hard count how many of you, our delegates, will walk out of the convention with us." So he got back to me in about 15 minutes and he said, "Oh, I have good news and good news." I said, "What's that?" He said, "All 300 will follow you if it's not in the speech." I said, "Well, what's the other good news?" 7 state delegations, including straights and gays, will follow you also. That's all I needed. Hello. Here's your choice. Gay is put in that speech, or 7 delegations are going to walk out of the convention, and the story in the morning papers is going to be about the walkout instead of this wonderful speech you're giving. Or you can be stubborn and pay the price. but we're going to be included. They didn't answer me. Well, no one knew. And everyone had a copy of this speech, and it wasn't in the speech because it wasn't there that morning. And by that time, the whole convention was on edge. The press was on edge. And Clinton got, and he said Asian Americans and Hispanic Americans and African Americans. And then he paused and he said, and yes, gay Americans. And the place went crazy. Now, think about that. That's only about 20 years ago. We had to threaten to walk out of a convention just to hear our name. Not for marriage, not for adoption, just to hear our name spoken in public. And that was considered a huge victory just 20 years ago. Well, in Hollywood, for example, every weekend, 2,000 LGBT people showed up every weekend to volunteer for Clinton. When the election was held, the CNN exit poll said that 1 out of every 7 votes that Bill Clinton received was LGBT. Well, we were ecstatic. We thought a new day, and a new day had indeed arrived. But he took all these positions on gay rights during the campaign. But as we all know, campaign promises, when you go to implement them, are a much tougher job. So we had recommended that he assign the executive order allowing LGBT people to serve with their country with honor after he's sworn in the Capitol before the inauguration parade and the ball. And that's what we all agreed to do. Now, the inauguration, all of us went. And I had 2 tickets to the best ball in town. And I knew I could have the best looking guy on my arm. That ticket was like a handsome magnet. Thank you. Thank you for understanding. So I got a guy named David Davis who was just not only good looking, brilliant, and a good heart, and he was thrilled to go with me to the best inaugural ball of Clinton. And the day of the inauguration, George Stephanopoulos calls with the president. And he said, we're not going to sign it today. I said, what? He said, we're not going to sign it. We need more time. We need 6 months. We need you to go out and organize people, and then we'll sign it. But we need you today to get on the phone to the LGBT community and let them know before the inauguration. I said, put the president on. President Clinton came on the phone and he said, as my friend, do you promise me after 6 months that you'll sign this? He said, you have my promise. I said, then I'll do what you need, Mr. President. And I made the calls, and then it was time to party, and we know how we like to party. Doesn't make any difference if there's an epidemic or oppression. We'll party in hell. And so we're getting ready to party, and I am dying to dance at my first inaugural ball. You know, I wanted to have Dave Davis in my arm in a slow number going like this, you know? And I get calls from all these LGBT leaders saying, you can't dance. It will embarrass us. It will become a major story in the press. And I said, well, what the hell are you supposed to do at a ball except dance? I said, I didn't come this far and get to my first inaugural ball and not dance. Then we got to the ball, and all my friends say, David, don't do this. Don't do this. So I turned to my good friend on my arm. I said, I won't do it if this will embarrass you. And he said, oh, I always like to dance. I said, all right, I don't know what's going to happen, So we waited to a nice, slow song. I said, let's get in the middle of the crowd, and then no one will really notice us, right? So him and I walk out to the middle of the crowd and get ready to cha-cha. Everybody left the dance floor. I kid you not. And there we were in the middle of the band even missed a note. Dancing alone because no one wanted to be on the dance floor with us. Finally, we see out of the edge of a crowd, now I'm 70, and these couple made me look young. And it turns out they are farmers from Iowa. And this little old lady and this little old man comes out to where we are at, and they start dancing, and she looks up and smiles and says, my husband and I always like to dance with the best dancers. And she had that right. The inauguration passed, and suddenly we were in this battle. The president held his first press conference. No one had prepared him for it. He was too busy. Everybody was too busy trying to get jobs. Nobody wanted to deal with the gay issue. So suddenly he was asked about this court case at his first press conference. A young sailor named Keith Meinhold, who had sued the courts to serve our country with dignity. And the day the president held his first press conference, a decision came down from a lower court saying he had the right to serve his country. So the very first question was, Mr. President, what do you think? And he said, well, I'm going to sign the executive order. I've said I was. He wasn't briefed. He wasn't prepared. The next day, in the front page of the New York Times, President to allow gays in the military. And the country went crazy. And there was a Southern senator named Sam Nunn who didn't even believe blacks should serve in the military and supported a segregationist candidate, Lester Maddox and George Wallace, 3 times. But he also was chair of the committee that governed the armed forces. And he was going to do everything he could to stop us. So he invited the president to come down to the USS Roosevelt on the guise of a tour of the ship. Right, you've all seen this. And Senator Nunn and Senator Warner took him down to the quarters where the sailors slept together. And at that moment, Senator Nunn, with all the press looking, said, "This is where you want gays to sleep?" That picture appeared in every paper in the country. And the next day, President Clinton said, well, maybe we'll have separate barracks. Maybe we'll have gay ships. Maybe we'll have gay units. Now, at first, we were a little conflicted because we thought we might be able to design our own uniform. But segregation in any guise is evil. So I spoke out and gave a big speech, and it got a lot of attention, and suddenly the relationships between the White House and I was very tense. And then we woke up, and there was a young man named Tom Stoddard. You got to hear about him. We all had gathered to form what was called the Campaign for Military Service in order to raise $2 million to do ads on television and stuff, why we should be able to serve with honor. Tom was dying of AIDS. He was one of the most respected people in our community, and he had probably 9 months to a year to go. And I went to see Tom, and I said, Tom, I know what's happening. He was covered with lesions. I got to ask, you're the most respected genius in our community. Will you head this campaign? Will you run it? And he said, I can't think of a better way to spend the last months of my life than fighting for freedom. Tom ran a brilliant campaign. We raised lots of money. Artists donated art. Writers wrote epic stories. Actors and actresses made appearances. The arts have always been very important in what we do. John Kennedy, always said that art should not be a reflection of society. It should be leading society, a voice of the oppressed. And that certainly was the case for arts and our epic struggle for freedom. In June, we hear, not from a call from the White House, nobody notified us, no one called Tom, that the president was going to propose don't ask, don't tell. Now, let me be clear what this is involved. Each of you think that you get up in the morning and you have children or you have someone you love, and you have pictures in your house, and you maybe drop your kids off at the school. The moment you arrived at your workplace, you would not be allowed to mention your spouse. You could never have pictures of your children on your desk. You don't get sick leave. You can't take days off to go to your children's soccer games. You can't even say that you've been on vacation with your family. And if any of that comes out, you are court-martialed or given a dishonorable discharge with no benefits. Now, none of you here could live like that. None of you. And neither could we. So we immediately started to oppose it. I knew it was a disastrous policy. And I've been to jail 15 times for human rights. I have a thing for handcuffs. What can I say? Thank you. And the Quakers have a tradition that you have to give witness in the face of great evil, even if it won't change anything. And I knew I had to get arrested over don't ask, don't tell, or I could never look at people in the eyes again. So I called my sister, and she said, if you get arrested, you'll not be allowed to go in the White House. Your dream of having a friend as president will be over. And maybe even your ability to work. But I had come too far. I had come too far to whore myself out politically. So I decided I better go to this political committee that raised all the money and tell them what I was going to do, because I wanted to give them a chance to condemn me. And old Diane Abbott, one of my friends, said, "Oh, honey, you're not going alone. We're all going with you. We all cut that deal with it." So 20-some of us get on a plane, and we go to Washington, and we get in front of the White House and link arms and start singing. And I look over, and there is the most handsome cop you have ever seen in your life. He's not up there, he is, in the sunglasses. I wasn't lying, was I? Well, the problem was, the morning when I got dressed, I decided to go commando with no underwear, forgetting that the first thing that this officer will do is take my belt. And my pants were loose-fitting, so here I am at this great historical occasion getting arrested at the White House, and all of I can think of is my pants are going to come down around my ankles and the whole nation's going to see my junk. Thank God my nation was spared that moment. He comes over, and I said to the others, "This one's mine." And they said, "Well, why do you get him?" And before they could even get an answer, I was out there like this. And he handcuffed me, and he's walking me to the truck to take us to jail. And he stopped and said, "Mr. Mixner." I said, "Yes, sir." "You always call the police, sir." And I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "Thank you. my brother's gay. And he said, I'm sorry I have to do this. And I said, if I had to be arrested, I'm glad that you can tell your brother that you did it. And give him my love. So I get in the wagon. He says, is there anything I can do for you, Mr. Mixner? And I said, well, you see all those people with their faces in the White House against the window watching? If you could run the siren real loud to give us voice to let them know we were here. He said, I'm afraid that's against the law. I said, okay, well, don't get in any trouble. So they shut the door and the engine starts, and suddenly we hear, and we had voice. We had voice. Now, it was a tough time. The next day, the White House announced that I was no longer welcome in the White House. It was on the front page of the newspapers. And nor was anyone associated with me welcomed in the White House, including my clients. In 24 hours, I lost my entire business. I couldn't work for 4 years. I was blacklisted. At the end of the third year, I was selling my watches, selling things, artwork and stuff to pay my rent and to feed myself. Now, no pity. I knew that was going to happen. If you know and accept responsibility for your own actions, there's no reason for pity. This was an individual decision on my part, an act of conscience. Then in 1996, the president supported a piece of legislation that would make it against the law for people to get married in every state in the United States and deny federal benefits to all people who were LGBT. He called me in tears, it was about 1 o'clock in the morning, I think, and said, David, I'm so sorry. It was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. And I believed him. Except 1 week later, all over the Christian-dominated states of the United States, they were running radio ads bragging that he had signed it in the presidential election. Now, it took us about a decade and a half, but President Obama allowed us to serve openly in the military. It took us another, And it took us about another 10 years, but the Supreme Court and President Obama made it possible for us to get married in every state. We're still fighting battles. In the state of Mississippi, they just passed a law making it legal to refuse any restaurant, any hotel, any business can refuse to serve me. My books, 3 books that I wrote, are now banned in every Mississippi library and not allowed to be used as a teaching tool in any university in the state of Mississippi. So we have our battles. But one thing alone, how long it took us, how much we sacrificed, we have never stopped fighting.
Be Some race on ahead, some follow behind, some go on their own way in time. Some women and some men long, some raise children, some under the moon. You can dream all the day, never reaching the end of everything possible for you. Don't be rattled by names, by towns, by games. Seek out spirits true. If you give your friends the best part of yourself, they will give the same back to you. You can be anybody you want to be. You can love whomever you will. You can travel any country that your heart leads, and know I will love you still. You can be by yourself, you can gather friends around, you can choose one special one, and the only measure of your words and your deeds will be the love you leave behind when you're done.
Well, it's time for me to say goodbye. My time is limited. I've been ill. Now it's your turn. You see, that freedom has no faith, it has no boundaries, it has no borders, it has no ideology, it has no political party. You can't be partially free. And here in Italy, a battle is taking place for civil unions that is inspiring us around the world. And the whole world is watching to see what you do. They and thousands like them deserve the right to love, to be free, to have dignity. And you say you want us to be free. And you know why? Because when you're totally free, you're strong. You're a complete person. You can stand up tall with dignity and integrity. And then we can stand by your side and feed the hungry and put clothes on those who are cold and provide shelter for the homeless, and yes, even make peace. The only crime you can make is the crime of silence. To sit silently in the middle of an historic, epic battle for civil unions would only bring shame upon you later. Because we're going to win. No matter how long it takes, we're going to win. And the thing I'm most proud about, someone asked me the other day, what are you most proud about? 56 years of helping others. And I said, I never hated. I never used hateful language. I never stopped laughing. But most important, I always came from a place of love. And my community has never hated. This tribe has always come from a place of love. And isn't that what it's about? Just simply love. Grazie.
ashes and put them